Welcome to A Dose of Feel Good. I'm your host, Whitney Bischoff, and today we are talking about if you are exhausted from smiling through it, small dose, lighter days. You can see full show notes at doseoffeelgood.my.canva.site. Now let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to Dose of Feel Good, everyone. I am super excited to have y'all join us this week. We are going to jump into something a little different. I mentioned this last week that we have launched our sticker shop, and in honor of that, we are actually starting a series which is new for us. So in honor of that, our topic this week is entitled, If You're Exhausted from Smiling Through It, Small Dose, Lighter Days. And I wanted to kick off an introduction to this series of kind of a little bit of letting y'all know where this came from. And I know the whole point of the podcast is a dose of feel good. And I think sometimes there's this maybe mentality that, every day has to feel good and maybe this positivity in the world. And that is the point after we kind of trudge through the reality that we're all in. And I really want this series to focus on normalizing the tough stuff that we all go through. And I really want us to remember that this is a podcast that doesn't glaze over our current reality that us as humans face, but rather it gives us a space to share, to connect, and to find hope. And that's where that feel good comes from, even when it's hard, and knowing that it is hard a lot of the time for a lot of us, myself included. And so I really hope from this series that we understand that we are all humans trying to figure it out. And on a lot of days that is hard. But part of this feel good message and series and the podcast is how do we find that hope even amongst that pain and those hard things? So that's going to kick off our series here. And if you really love this series and these messages, there are stickers to go along with it, just for those helpful reminders and hopefully to then share that message with other folks as well. So again, our topic today is if you're exhausted from smiling through it. I am one of those people as well. Anyone who knows me knows I am one of those people. I just keep going, doing more and more, and I smile through all of it. And that's not necessarily always the healthiest way to go about life. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But the hope message with there is give ourselves that small dose of feel good and know that there are lighter days ahead. So if you're one of those people like myself that is exhausted from smiling through it, why is it important to give ourselves that grace and to find those lighter days? I think it's really important to recognize that we live in a world where showing the real vulnerable sides can be uncomfortable. I know I'm one of those people that I think I'm known for, maybe giving off this persona that I have it all figured out, that, every day is fine and dandy. And I can tell you that is not the reality. I think putting and plastering that smile on or honestly laughing through it is maybe a coping mechanism, but a lot of the time that's not the reality, because for me it's uncomfortable to show that maybe I don't have it all figured out, or maybe I am just super exhausted from sometimes the constant pieces of life has hit me in the face again and another thing, and sometimes it feels like that reality of, at least for me, like, is it just me, right? Like, is it just me where life keeps smacking me in the face over and over again? And, that uncomfortable feeling of, I don't want it to just be me, or I don't want to always be the person that has another thing that's happening with them. And so there's this piece where it can be uncomfortable to show those vulnerable sides because, sometimes it's just easier to say, I'm going to plaster this smile on because I don't want to feel like it's another thing for another person when we all have our things, right? And so I think because there's that uncomfortable feeling, obviously, for ourselves, I also think it's not normalized to share maybe in those vulnerable moments. And so sometimes then when maybe we open that door and we are real with someone else or with ourselves even, it makes the other person uncomfortable because we don't live in a culture where we do easily share when maybe things aren't going as well, right? Or we share that vulnerable side. I think especially for the people that tend to put on that face, like we have it all figured out. And so the moment where we let that go a little bit, it can be really uncomfortable. And other people are like, whoa, I don't know what to do with this, right? And so our solution to that, both because it's uncomfortable for ourselves and then it's uncomfortable maybe for the other person that we might be opening up to, we plaster on this smile. And so because of that, because of this cycle in our culture, we live outside of that reality, the reality of how we actually feel internally. And so that can be exhausting because it's constant. It's this constant feeling like, okay, my reality is that I don't really feel great, but I feel like I have to put on this smile like I have it all together. And that culture of it's fine, everything is fine, is how we live. And unfortunately, everything is not indeed fine. And so I think we really need to start flipping that script and giving ourselves permission and space to let that smile fall a little bit. And it's going to be uncomfortable. I can tell you, I'm preaching to myself a little bit here. Anyone who's close to me, and even folks who are not close to me who have been kind of pushing me a little bit will tell you I need to do this as well. So we're all in this together. But I think giving ourselves that permission creates those cultures where we can let that that false narrative slide because it is exhausting and it will wear on us. And so find those safe people, those safe spaces, and realize that when we are okay with being uncomfortable, that's where we can really start to see change happen with ourselves in our cultures. And that's where we can maybe start to feel when those lighter days can actually start to happen. And I think this can be demonstrated in a variety of ways. So I have been seeing a lot of this on my TikTok recently, where people have just videoed themselves of just breaking down. And the comment sections are just, I've been there, or, that validating. And a lot of them obviously are strangers, but I think we can all relate that, like, you get to that point where, like, you just can't put that smile on anymore. And I think that is the reality that we're all in. And that's what we're talking about with that culture change, right? Is that it doesn't have to be behind a video screen, but not putting up that smile, right? Just showing like this is where we actually are. I think this can also really be demonstrated. I've heard this in a variety of settings. I work in the mental health field, and the actual real anger that bubbles up inside of me when I hear we don't talk about mental health here. And unfortunately, that is still the narrative that is out there. And just the negativity, or even just the hard things that can come out of when that is part of the cultures that we exist. So we plaster on that smile that only furthers this narrative, right? And it is just so exhausting and detrimental to ourselves, to our cultures. And I was recently presenting to a group of HR folks, and I asked them, would you reach out if you recognized when someone was struggling? Obviously, this was in their spaces, and there was a lot of silence in the room, which I was actually quite surprised about. But that's where that uncomfortability comes from of, it's awkward, could be awkward. But that's where we really want to start changing these cultures of, if you recognize when someone maybe is letting that smile drop, that's where we need to check in with folks because we want them to feel lighter and that we aren't going through it alone. And at least for myself, I know that's one of the scariest pieces of letting those smiles fall is someone going to be there to help me pick myself up, because I don't want to do it alone. Because sometimes we already feel like we're trying to navigate things alone. And as humans, we don't want to do it all alone. And so I think kind of checking yourself a little bit of, one, trusting that someone is going to catch you when you let that smile fall, but also recognizing if you see somebody else finally feeling brave enough to let those smiles fall, that we're going to challenge ourselves to reach out, check in, and be comfortable in a culture that does that, that is going to care about the people, whether they are total strangers or people maybe that we're not even that close to, but know that there's so much power in that. And I think the impact of what this actually looks like in practice, knowing that there is such a long-term impact of living in a state of constant exhaustion. So smiling through it, it's taxing, it wears on you, and you owe it to yourself to move from a place of constant exhaustion to a place where you're thriving. And that starts in a place of showing vulnerability, and knowing that none of us have it figured out. Even the folks like myself who really do smile through a lot of things, even myself, we are all dealing with things. And so knowing that even the people that tend to smile through it are often the people who maybe should take this message and show that vulnerability a little bit more, because it is exhausting. And we want to move to a place where we're truly living our best life. And it is okay to show those pieces, and know that we are in it together. And so knowing that when we let it go, we lighten that load. We feel a little bit more free, and we can breathe a little bit. And ultimately, we know we feel better in those spaces. It's less that we have to carry, and we all feel better in those spaces. But it starts internal. It starts with us and giving ourselves that space to share that, to push the culture of what is normal, to be okay with that uncomfortability for ourselves, for each other, and knowing that feel good includes purging some of that hard stuff to make way for the lighter feelings, more full and feel good days. And ultimately, that's all what we're yearning for, right? That we don't have to live in this state of constant exhaustion, this faking that we have it all together, because I promise you, none of us do. But yeah, when we can be vulnerable and really kind of lean into some of those hard things, we can let some of it go. And then there's so many greater things that can kind of fill in those boxes, if you will, or fill in its place. And I think the heavier stuff can go and the lighter stuff can make way. And that's ultimately what we're looking for. So what does this actually look like in practice? So a couple of pieces to put into place. I think starting with recognize what your go-to coping is when some of those negative feeling comes in. Is it plastering on a smile? What does that actually look like? And asking yourself, are you coping negatively? Are you coping positively? What does that look like? And if it is more negative, and I would say even like plastering on a smile, that could be viewed negatively. And I think in this context it is. And so challenge yourself a little bit and adjust what that coping looks like. What does it look like to be effective in those moments when maybe some of that negative coping comes in? Or what would it look like to work through some of those heavier things, maybe in a more positive way, or a way that can contribute to what it looks like to be a little bit more lighter? The second piece, give yourself that space to feel the heavy things, which can be really hard. And then connect and share in that vulnerability. That's where we change those cultures. Don't isolate. That is definitely a huge thing for myself. I don't want my hard stuff to be somebody else's hard stuff. And so that's where I tend to isolate. But I really encourage you, don't do that. Sharing your experiences, it helps us know that we don't have to do life alone, and people want to be there to support you along your journey. The third piece is be real. Be real with what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, not the version of a culture of what you feel like they should expect you to feel, but what are you actually feeling or experiencing, rather than the set expectation of what you feel like you should be doing and experiencing. And then the last piece is kind of from this broader edge, is really commit to building a culture, and pushing that envelope a little bit that normalizes what it means to make lighter days. And what I mean by that is be okay with uncomfortable conversations, and really encouraging when you hear spaces where we don't talk about that here, calling that out a little bit, because that's the only way where we can truly make change. And just knowing, from a space of anyone that really does struggle, when you finally feel comfortable to share, to open up, and to have that support, when you have that cut off, that can be just a really scary place to be in. And so be part of that culture that normalizes that, we're going to be open. We're going to know that all humans struggle, and that's okay. But we're going to share in that together. And I think that can be really, really beautiful. So with that, that's going to wrap up our episode today. So like I said, this is going to be a series, which I'm really excited for. So if you liked this episode, stay tuned. We have a series of 14. So this is the first of 14 coming your way. We will have stickers also. So if you need helpful reminders, again, our Etsy shop is open. You can find the link on our Instagram. It is also on our website. I'll be featuring it kind of throughout our time over the next month or so. I will probably start putting some of this on TikTok if I really feel brave. Otherwise, I always love to hear from y'all. So if there are topics you like to hear, I also just want to hear if this is something that's really helpful. I want to hear more from y'all. So I hope this sends some feel-good energy out into the universe. Otherwise, have a great week and stay tuned for more. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you are feeling ready to conquer the week and let your impact ripple out to the world around you. Let's connect on Instagram and Threads at Dose of Feel Good Podcast. If you're loving the podcast, I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button and leave a review. Until next time, share your own dose of feel good and never underestimate the power of positivity.